A lot of music theory discussion centers around the idea that musical interest is generated by establishing a norm, creating tension, and then releasing that tension. Whether it's concerning melodic development or chord progressions, we tend to think of motion towards some musical goal as being the main appeal of a piece. This is certainly a fundamental element of music, but it begs the question, how does a beat work? You know, like a musical vamp anywhere from 2 beats to 8 bars in length that provides a rhythmic and sometimes harmonic backdrop as it endlessly repeats underneath a melody or a rap verse or whatever else. This isn't something that moves from point A to point B or even necessarily develops as a piece of music progresses. It doesn't really fit into our model of tension and resolution at all, and yet sick beats definitely create musical interest to the point that arguably the majority of modern music is built around this format. The Ace Combat series does a great job of combining orchestral music with a modern beat-oriented sensibility, which makes it perfect for showcasing a couple of the reasons why I think this kind of composition is so appealing. Fundamentally, I think beats create engagement through rhythmic layering, or piecing together different rhythmic parts that contrast and complement each other in a compelling way. Key to this concept is making sure different parts are operating at different levels of subdivision. So, if we take a steady pulse, we can evenly divide each beat into subdivisions of 2 notes per beat, or 1/8 notes, 4 notes per beat, or 1/16 notes, 3 notes per beat, or triplets, and on and on. For example, if you have a snare drum laying down quarter notes, you wouldn't add a kick and hi-hat also playing quarter notes. This would be totally rhythmically consonant, but also totally rhythmically boring. Instead, you'd probably subdivide the hi-hat into 1/8 notes. Maybe even throw a stream of 1/16 notes to the kick drum. Or, if you're not a metalhead, maybe have a rhythm in the kick drum that syncopates at the 16th note level. Not every 16th note is being played, but just having a rhythm based on this subdivision is enough to imply that the kick is operating at this rhythmic layer. It's the way these different subdivisions interact with each other that makes rhythmic layering interesting. Ace Combat 6's Liberation of Grace Maria applies this idea to its arrangement, using 3 looping rhythmic layers at once. On top, we have the horn section playing a looping 4-bar long rhythm of a whole note tied to a half note, followed by a half note, followed by a double whole note. This implies a half note subdivision, though the emphasis is on the double whole note. Grounding this on the bottom end is the chugging 1/8 note bass, a looping 2-beat long rhythm of straight 1/8 notes with an accented backbeat. This obviously works on the 1/8 note subdivision level, but that accent creates the implication of an extra quarter note layer. In the middle is the string ostinato, a looping 1-bar long rhythm at the 16th note level of subdivision with syncopated accents that slot in between the 1/8 notes of the bass and around the half notes in the melody. Not only do the different subdivisions conflict with each other, but the different lengths of each looping figure add to this layering effect. There's a friction created by layering these contrasting rhythms together. Not quite a dissonance, but a tension that just feels good to listen to. Kind of like a stanky chord voicing that you just can't seem to get enough of. Getting this balance of tension right is important, too. If you had each instrument playing on the beat in perfect unison, you get that boring rhythmic consonance mentioned earlier. If each instrument was playing in different tempos or time signatures with no way to relate them to each other, you get unbearable rhythmic dissonance. But striking a balance that challenges the listener rhythmically in a way that can still be made sense of is satisfying, and makes it enjoyable to repeat the same few bars over and over and over. This line between chaos and order is going to be different for everybody, of course. In fact, I'm sure some of you watching right now are thinking that a total cacophony of players thinking in different tempos actually sounds pretty cool. But generally speaking, I think this idea of rhythmic layering offers an objective guideline for creating interesting beat-oriented music. Of course, it's not enough to simply have different rhythmic layers. The rhythms at play have to each be interesting, or at least complement each other in a satisfying way. Ace Combat Zero's Zero mirrors its marriage of orchestral and Spanish instruments with separated rhythmic layers, the Spanish guitar and percussion providing lively syncopated 16th note rhythms, while strings, horns, and voice float on top with longer half and whole note rhythms. This rhythm in particular, the tresillo, is inherently an incredibly satisfying rhythm that's been completely dominating pop and dance music for decades now, and it is imbued into the skeleton of this track. Near the beginning, you'll hear a decorated version of this played by the guitar, bass, and percussion underneath these swelling horn pads. While on its own, the horn part is hardly rhythmically exciting, it contrasts the driving tresillo pattern in a way that actually intensifies the latter's effect. We see more rhythmic intrigue in the solo guitar that fills in the spaces of the melody, floating behind shifting orchestral pads and solo voice. See how nicely the varied triplet rhythms and 16th note syncopation contrast the half-note horn counterlines and whole-note vocal melody. This tresillo rhythm gets transformed and used as the primary accompaniment figure for the following guitar solo section, where the focus shifts to the Spanish half of the arrangement. The tresillo up until this point in the tune has been presented as 2 dotted eighths followed by an eighth note, but here the rhythm guitar accents the same rhythm blown up to 2 dotted quarter notes followed by a quarter note, amidst chugging 16th note percussion and muted guitar strumming. This allows for an extremely cool moment where we hear the guitar soloist make use of the original shortened tresillo figure inside of this elongated tresillo for a nested tresillo sandwich. At the climax of the piece, we have several rhythmic layers all woven together to create a towering sound. A 16th note layer in the percussion accenting the tresillo rhythm with the bass, horn, and men's choir accenting the first and fourth beats of each bar for a kind of decorated whole note layer, while the women's choir floats down from above with this harmonized quarter note line. These accented downbeats rub against the tresillo's anticipation of those same beats, creating lots of that tasty rhythmic dissonance that you crave. As you can see, layering multiple contrasting rhythms together can lead to some incredibly dense, powerful music. But at the same time, this concept can generate interest in a more stripped down setting as well. An offshoot to the idea of interlocking rhythms is the hemiola, an incredibly common rhythmic building block that pits a beat of 3 equally spaced notes per bar against a beat of 2 equally spaced notes per bar, creating this figure. This rhythm is often used to drive grooves in tunes written in 6/8 time, such as Ace Combat 5's First Flight. The first hint of hemiola occurs just 7 bars into the piece, where its swashbuckling 6/8 feel is punctuated by straight quarter note stabs walking up from D to E to our F sharp minor tonic chord. It's important to remember that for it to be a true hemiola, the regular 2 beat has to be present underneath the accented 3 beat. In this instance, where the whole orchestra is accenting these quarter notes, there's no rhythmic dissonance. It's the way the 2 rhythms rub together that makes it interesting, which we see further on in the piece combined with our rhythmic layering concept. The 8th note 6/8 groove is being carried on in the drums, with the hi-hat accenting the 2-beat feel of each measure. This is pitted against an accented hemiola rhythm in the bass. This is the crux of the rhythmic interest of the section, like an engine underscoring the more noticeable dotted half-note horn counterline and soaring high strings. This quarter note against dotted quarter note hemiola is just one example of a cross rhythm. The clash between 2 polyrhythmic accents is inherently interesting, and much music outside of the 6/8 time signature uses this rhythmic spark without actually being in 2 different simultaneous time signatures. Another basic example would be the now commonplace 4/3 cross rhythm. Evenly splitting a bar into thirds and quarters yields a 4/3 polyrhythm, which can be notated in 1 meter by placing 3 quarter notes against 4 dotted eighth notes. This rhythm not only generates interesting rhythmic dissonance, but this and other cross rhythms can also open up a door to new levels of rhythmic layering. Not only can we weave together rhythms at different levels of subdivision, such as quarter notes and eighth notes, we can create new layers in between these subdivisions, such as a dotted eighth note layer, or a 4/3 cross rhythm layer. In Ace Combat 7's Daredevil, we see this concept pieced together with other rhythmic layers to create an orchestral EDM groove. The double whole note horn pads escalating in intensity, a 16th note string line that very clearly accents beats 1 and 3 of each measure, and hi-hats accenting the offbeats on an 8th note layer are set on fire by this 4/3 cross rhythm in the bass, with an extra beat added before it to make the rhythm fit into a bar of 4/4 time. Even though the bass and strings are technically both operating at the subdivision of the 16th note, you can feel the friction between the two rhythms. The consistent spacing between the bass notes gives the illusion of a separate polyrhythm that resolves on beat 1 of each bar, which clashes nicely with the high strings straight 16th note feel. The tune's climax pushes this rhythmic intensity to a maximum by piling more layers on top of everything, with the double whole notes moving from the horns to the voice, the horns taking up a half-note harmonized counterline, and the 4/3 cross rhythm emphasized in the trumpets as well as the bass. That's how you build a tune. Rhythm and groove is one of the hardest things to explain in music theory, but it's also one of the most fascinating. I hope I could do it some kind of justice in this video and that you found something either helpful for your own writing or just interesting to think about here. Big thanks to patron Paul Calloway for requesting Ace Combat's music. I wasn't familiar with these soundtracks at all, but I had a lot of fun checking them out for this video. If you'd like to join my Patreon and help support the channel, feel free to check it out here. You can also follow me on Twitter at 8BitMusicTheory. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.